bats in Lewis County. My name is Nicholle Stevens. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I am an assistant district biologist, so that means I cover a district, and the district I cover is Cowlitz, Lewis, and Wahkiakum counties, so we have 3 counties in southwest Washington. And I do work with bats, but I also work with a whole bunch of other wildlife species in those 3 counties as well. So bats is one of many. I haven't given this talk before. I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to take me. I think it might be better to just, if you guys have questions as I'm talking, feel free to just raise a hand and we can do questions during the presentation. Yep.
I guess when we were starting to talk there, you're fish and wildlife, and you said you, if I heard you right, deal with bats or work with bats. Mm-hmm. So there's no hunting license for bats. So then what do you do? If people call you up and say, I don't know what to do with my bat.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. That I'm going to address later in the presentation. I'll probably just say that so that I'm not saying the same thing over. Yeah, and then afterwards, I'm sure we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end and discussion and everything. So you're welcome to ask questions during the presentation or hold them till the end or whatever is best for you. So, and so this presentation, I've kind of broken it up into 2 parts. So the first part is going to be about like bat ecology and the bat research that we do at Washington Fish and Wildlife. And then the second part is going to be focused towards kind of creating bat habitat in your backyard. So part 1. So why are bats important? Well, they provide essential ecosystem services. So pest control is pretty huge. It's estimated that they basically save billions of dollars on pest control for agriculture. It's a hard number to quantify, but we know they eat a lot of insects, and so therefore they do save a lot of money on pest control. They also feed on insects that may not be a problem for agriculture, but they're just pesky. So mosquitoes is one example of that. So bats in Washington, they feed exclusively on insects, but in other areas there's bats that are actually pollinators, so they pollinate different crops, and they also disperse seeds. So there's 47 species of bats in North America, and in Washington we have 15, so pretty good species diversity in Washington. This is the list of the 15 that's found in Washington. As I mentioned before, they're insectivorous bats in Washington, and they use echolocation to find their prey. So echolocation, you guys probably all know what echolocation is, but just in case you don't, it's basically using sound waves to kind of see. So they emit these sound waves. They're very, very high frequency, so they're not something that we can hear as humans, but the sound waves bouncing off of objects back towards them sort of paints a picture for them, so that's how they can say, oh, there's an insect that I want to eat, and go towards it. Yeah.
Is there like 3 or 4 species in Lewis County?
That's my next slide.
Okay.
So in Lewis County, we actually have 11 of the 15 bats in Washington. So yeah, I really like these photos. They kind of like remind me of like class photos. So yeah, these are all the bats we have in Lewis County. If you have bats like in a structure at your house, most likely they're going to be the little brown bat, Yuma myotis, big brown bat, or the long-legged myotis. Some of these other species, they use forest more for roosting and for raising young and that sort of thing. So those are the 4 that are very common in structures.
Which one gets the largest pounds wise?
I'm pretty sure the big brown bat is the largest one.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't even think they weigh like 1 pound. Even though they're the largest, they're pretty lightweight. You know, they're probably like this big with their wings stretched out completely.
Do the populations intermingle? Do they have reside
Yeah.
in the same spaces?
They do, yeah. So some of these, and I will get into the maternity or nursery colonies of females and young, but yeah, we do monitor those, and oftentimes we do find, like, especially the little browns and the yumas will be together, but sometimes we'll have all 4 of those together in one colony. Yeah. So some of the threats to bats are degraded or loss of roosting and foraging habitat. The roosting habitat, so it's different in the summer and the winter. So in the summer, the females in those 4 species that I mentioned, not necessarily all species, but they do congregate, and so they use the body heat of their bodies to kind of maintain a high temperature that the young need to grow. So some of these structures that can accommodate a lot of bats are really important. But historically they would have used, like these old growth trees or trees, that were snags, and we've lost a lot of those from like historically what was here. So structures can be really important too, like barns or attic spaces of houses, but oftentimes it's just not really compatible with whatever the person is trying to use that space for. Because if there's a bunch of bats in the attic of your house, then they're pooping in there, it's eventually going to smell really bad, and you don't really want that. So that's a pretty big threat. Disturbances at roosts, it's probably not as big of threat as the loss of roosting and foraging habitat, but it can be pretty problematic, especially in places like where they are roosting during the winter time and they're in a very low energy state. If somebody goes into like a cave or something, then it's really disruptive because it forces them to use a bunch of their energy that they have stored up for the winter to wake up, and then when they wake up, there isn't really anything for them to eat. So wind energy is somewhat newer, but it hasn't been great for bats. There's specific species like the hoary bat that are affected by wind energy, and it's estimated that about 600,000 bats are killed per year by wind turbines. There's infectious diseases, so I'm going to talk a lot about white nose syndrome in this presentation, so that's something that's relatively new. And then persecution or disturbance by humans. Go ahead.
So wind energy, is that actually run into the, okay, nothing else?
Yeah, basically they're, it could be displacing them because it's putting wind turbines in areas where they would have foraged, and maybe they're not going to forage there now, but the bats that are still foraging in those areas are getting hit by the actual turbines. And even if they don't get hit by them, just flying close enough to them can damage them because they are so small, and their wings are, they're very thin membrane, so it can kill them without actually hitting them. Let's go. Okay. So white nose syndrome. This was first discovered in North America in 2006-2007 at a cave in New York. So it hasn't really been around in North America for all that long. The syndrome itself is caused by a fungal disease. I'm not going to try to say it. We just call it PD. It's a cold-loving fungus, and so it really does well in these areas where bats overwinter, so it affects them a lot when they're in hibernation. It's invasive to North America, so it's there's a lot of evidence of distribution in Eurasia, so it's likely where that came from. We don't know exactly how it got here, but it is. It's likely that it was probably spread by, being on somebody's shoes or clothes or something like that. And, somehow maybe somebody went into a cave or something. So anyways, so basically while they're hibernating, the fungus will actually grow on the bat, and it gives this sort of like white fuzzy appearance, and it grows on their muzzle and on their wings, and it irritates them, so they end up waking up, and they're again using that energy that they need, to survive the winter in this low energy state. They're waking up, they're using those reserves. Sometimes they're going and flying around. That photo on the top there is basically, these bats have flown out of the cave that they're hibernating in and just died on the snow. So that was sort of how it was first discovered. It has killed over 6 million hibernating bats in eastern North America. So it's been really, really devastating in eastern North America. Some places have like over a 90% mortality rate. It's transmitted bat to bat, so they're some of the species when they're wintering, they're in these groups, they're all huddled up, and so it's really easy for them to pass it to each other. It can also just be on the surface that they're wintering, and it can get onto them that way. It doesn't infect humans or other wildlife, but we can spread it to the environment. So it also it grows in the soft tissue, and it can cause dehydration. And as I mentioned, they basically are arousing more often through the winter, and so it essentially leads to like starvation. And then additional mortality from that disease is wing damage. So sometimes we see that on bats where their wings are damaged and they can't fly adequately. So inability to regulate body temperature, breathing disruptions, and dehydration.
What's the solution?
I don't know. There is some really cool research happening, especially with some like grad students at universities. Like there's one in Washington where they're treating them with probiotics to see if that can help combat the fungus. There was another one, but I can't remember what it was. So yeah, there are some kind of interesting ideas coming about to try to combat it. Yep.
So I was wondering, are certain species more susceptible, and also do they get like the ones that survive? Are they more immune to it?
I don't know if we know about the immunity thing. It's definitely possible that they could have some sort of immunity to it, or maybe they have like a genetic predisposition to be able to fight it off that they would then pass on to their offspring. But I don't know that. I'm not sure if that has been borne out in the research at all. And as far as the species, yeah, there are certain species. So far, it doesn't seem like the species over here are affected as dramatically as they are in Eastern North America, and that's because we generally don't have these huge colonies of hibernating bats that are like thousands. So it's like if you have these huge colonies with thousands of bats, then they're more likely to be spreading it to each other. So, but there are some species, and I have a slide in here later about species that are carriers, so they can carry the fungus on them, but they're not affected by it. So this is just a depiction of sort of how white nose has spread over time. So the purple is the earliest detection, so 2006, 2007, and then it goes down here. So the red is the most recent. This was made in 2019, so it's a little out of date, but yeah, basically it just kind of like spread from New York. We aren't really sure how it went, from here all the way up into Washington. It's a little strange, but it's also possible that there are bats in these states that have it or had it before Washington did, and it just wasn't detected. So these are the 13 species that have been confirmed with white nose syndrome. So some of these are Washington bats, some of them are not.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so some of them have, none of the bats in Washington are listed as threatened and endangered at this point. Because of white nose syndrome, some of the bat species in eastern North America have become listed as threatened and endangered. Okay, and let's see. So these are the 6 species that have been confirmed to carry the fungus. So they're carrying the fungus around on their bodies, but for some reason they're not affected by white nose syndrome.
So if they could figure out why they don't have it, or they don't.
Mm-hmm. Then that could be a clue into how we can combat it. Okay. So in Washington, what are the potential impacts on Washington's bat populations? And we pretty much just have to say we don't know at this point. Unfortunately, we have a lot of gaps in information as to just abundance, just basic questions about bats in Washington, especially prior to white nose arriving. Once we got white nose, we got funding to work on them, and so we are doing a lot more research now, but we don't have a picture of like what the population numbers were before and what they're after and that sort of thing. There are individual colonies that we monitor, and up until a point they test negative for white nose and then they test positive, and so then we can see what happens after that point. So yeah, there's just a lot of we don't really know where a lot of the bats in Washington are going in the winter. We just don't. We just haven't done the research on that. So there's just a lot of questions that are unclear as far as how this is going to affect bats. So far, it hasn't been devastating like it was in eastern North America, so that's good. So here's some of the things that we are doing, that WDFW is doing for surveys and monitoring. So I will go through each of these. The first one is called NA-BAT, and it stands for North American Bat Monitoring Program. It's a continent-wide partnership, so it involves federal, local, state, and nonprofit to measure trends of occupancy over time. So I'll explain a little bit about that. So this is a map of Southwest Washington. There's Centralia, there's Longview. So basically they come up with this randomly selected grid locations, and then somebody is assigned to monitor each one of these grids. So these two, myself and my supervisor, we monitor these two. We have another one that's up by Mineral Lake.
How big is the square geographically?
It looks pretty big.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, they are big. I don't remember the exact dimensions of it. So here's zoomed in on these grids. So there's Riderwood right there, Abernathy Creek. So yeah, pretty good size, and then they're divided into quadrants. And we go and we place a detector in each quadrant, and it's just for one night. So this is, I guess the previous photo shows, it doesn't show the detector super well, but we put the detector inside of this like waterproof box. It has a microphone connected to it. And so we put that on like a telescoping rod, and basically it just turns on at sunset, it turns off at sunrise, and it records all of these bat sounds throughout the night. And so you end up with,
Do different species have different sounds?
yeah, so you end up with all of these recordings, and like, if you play them, you're not gonna hear anything, because
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah.
yeah,
How can you, yeah.
you can't hear them. So, but it's basically these, these audio files of all the echolocation calls. So you're trying to get the calls that they're making while they're foraging, and so there's some really cool, software now that you can run these through, and they will basically, predict what they think the bat sound is, and then we always have somebody go through and like make sure that the software correctly identified it.
Is that depiction different sounds heard over a period of time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's, what, 30 there, and that period of time was 5 minutes or an hour?
This was, so this is like the minute, so 26, 28, 29, so yeah.
So
this-
about 10 minutes.
Yeah, and so like we'll end up, some of these places, you'll have thousands of them, thousands of recordings in one night, and of like 8 different species that are coming to these areas.
Here.
So yeah, this is basically monitoring the trends of occupancy. It can't really tell us like how many bats are there, but it can tell us what species are there, and then we just keep doing this year after year after year, and it can tell you if they're, the trends increasing or decreasing.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
We used to do howling, where you take like a Bluetooth speaker and play owl screeches and then see if they screech back at you. Can you do the same thing with bats? Can you play a specific bat screech in an area to see if there's other bats there?
I don't think so. I'm not aware of that. I think it just might be just differences. I used to work on owls too, and they're territorial, so they're calling back because they think another owl's in their territory, and bats aren't really territorial. So yeah, I don't think you can do that. I also know that the sound waves that they're emitting, they don't go very far, because they're trying to see what's sort of like directly in front of them, and it also is good because it doesn't like interfere with like the other bats that are foraging around them. So yeah, I guess, yeah. So another thing that we're doing a lot of during the summer are maternity roost exit counts. Maternity roosts are also called nursery roosts, and so basically these consist of females with their young. The young are called pups. They typically have one pup in the summer from May, June. And they congregate in these, hundreds, sometimes groups.
Where are the males when the females and the pups are together? Are they like little stag groups over here? Do they stay together as a group, or are they just random?
They're generally, they can roost together, but generally it would just be like a few of them. Typically they're mostly just individual. They just find different places to roost. It could be in a little crevice, it could be in like some tree bark or something like that. So yeah, they're not really, so basically the reason that the females are seeking out these structures is because they need really high temperatures to raise their young. I mean, it gets super hot in some of these places, and that's good because they're going out at night to forage, and the pups are, for a while at least, are left alone. And when they're super young, they can't like thermoregulate very well. So in these structures and with, you know, the group, they can keep their young warm during the nights and early mornings and stuff like that. So we go out and we do these counts. We usually do them, we try to do them at least once, but sometimes twice. We have like a time period that's sort of the before the pups can fly. So that count is basically we're just counting all of the females, and then after a certain point we would assume that the pups are also flying, and so that would be a count of females plus young. Yeah.
Can the pups cling immediately? Because, I mean, like you're talking being a barn peak. That's what I was wondering, because I thought some of the females had to stay there and keep the pups up wherever they were, but you're kind of saying that they can cling.
Yeah, they can cling pretty much immediately. I don't know if it's like, you know, within like the first few days, but relatively quickly, yeah, they're basically just leaving them in there, and they're just like, yeah, holding on.
And then will the pups huddle then? When the females are going?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, it depends on, depends on that temperature.
Would you say high temperature like what?
I can't remember the exact temperature, but I think they're needing like, it's like between like 85 and 100 degrees.
Okay. Well, it keeps the white nose down, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the summer is the time when the white nose is not really affecting them. You know, it doesn't do well in the heat. It's a cold loving fungus. So yeah, we don't do any, we're not looking for clinical signs of white nose on bats in the summertime, but we do test for the fungus, for presence of the fungus during, a lot of times we pair them with these counts. Let's see.
Are they working on like a botanical to get the white mold? I mean, is there any thoughts like that, like a natural predator, the white mold that put in the caves?
Oh, something, yeah. It's possible. I'm not really up to speed on all the different research. I'm sure there's probably more going on in Eastern North America, but I'm not really sure. And so, you know, as you can see, a lot of these maternity roost exit counts are in structures, and so we basically get these leads from the public. So people like you will contact us and say, hey, I have bats in my attic, and a lot of times they don't want them there, but other times they're just interested in the bats. And so if people let us, we'll come out and count them. We just basically, you know, set up our chairs and watch the exits for like an hour. I mean, all the bats are exiting within basically like a 45-minute time period around sunset. So yeah, it's a pretty fun survey. So this is our map of where we've done counts, like where all the red is. And then the yellow with green on top, those are reports that we've gotten from the public. So somebody has, I mean, you know, it could be a colony, but it could just be like, you know, I had a dead bat at my house or something like that. And so if it looks like something that we might want to monitor, we follow up with people and check it out. And some of these places we've, you know, been monitoring for years and years. So if you guys want to report a colony, then that would be great. And so for white nose syndrome monitoring, there's a couple different ways to test for the fungus. So you can test fresh guano, so it has to be fresh, it has to be like within 28 days. You can't go and like scoop up a bunch of old guano and send it into the lab. It has to be like within 28 days. Or we can take swabs. So those can be like environmental swabs, like you know, the rock or someplace where they're roosting, or we can swab the bats directly, so we capture them. Or I guess we don't necessarily have to capture them. This is a picture of us doing a swab in the wind. So this is in a cave, one of the lava caves up by Mount St. Helens, and so yeah, we just go in there, count the bats, swab some of them around the muzzle, and I don't know if you can tell his little mouth's open, but they don't actually wake up. You know, we don't want to wake them up, but they just have this just sort of like brain stem reaction to just like, you know, like and they like make a little noise. So yeah, we can swab the bats. If we don't find bats, we'll just swab the rock. And then this picture is so this is one of the places that we monitor I'll stand up here so I'm not blocking everyone, where we do the maternity count. And so I just went up and like put some boxes under, because they're all roosting like right under the center, you know, where there's like these two beams next to each other, and it just creates this perfect little like tiny place for them to cram into. And so just go like put boxes or plastic under that. And so then you can make sure that you're getting the fresh guano to send in. And this place actually is one that we've been monitoring for quite a while, and this was the first year that it did test positive for white nose. So we'll be able to kind of see what happens to that colony. This is a colony of long-legged myotis. So we do hibernaculum surveys, and that's where we go into these caves where they winter and count the number of bats that we see. And we wear like these Tyvek suits, and you know, so basically we're not spreading any disease on our clothing. We know that we're not, because we're wearing these suits, and then when we get out of the cave, we take them off, and we put them in the garbage bag, and we throw them away. So this is a picture of a cave that was mostly blocked by snow, and so we had to kind of like slide in there. And then, you know, just all the gear that we wear. And then this is a little cluster of Townsend's bats.
Are those alive?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're hibernating in that picture. So they're like low energy, so they're not responding at all to us, you know, walking past them. Or, I mean, we do try to be really quiet, so we're not like waking them up, but they don't really respond to the light or anything like that.
So as a general rule, if you wanted to go look at bats, you should probably go in the summer season instead of in the winter when you can wake them up, or?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend going and trying to look at them in the winter, just because it can be disruptive. So, I mean, it can be disruptive. Like, you do have to be careful in the summertime too, because, you know, it's gonna, if you're getting really close to bats that have young, like, it's gonna be stressful for them if they feel like you're a threat. So you'd have to be careful at any time, but yeah, summer would be better.
When you count bats in the caves, down by Rainier?
Mount St. Helens.
Mount St. Helens?
Yeah.
How many bats were there?
There's not a ton. I mean, I would say some of the caves, like, you know, like the most we would see would be like 50 to 100, and they're all, and they're spread out, you know, they're so, you know, they're in maybe a cluster of, so the Townsend's bats, we see them in clusters, and sometimes of like, I mean, there could be like 20 of them or something. But the myotis species, so I guess that's not something I didn't really talk about, was that it's difficult to tell a lot of these species just by looking at them. So generally, you know, we use echolocation to tell the species. It's kind of the most non-invasive way. I mean, some of these bats, you actually have to like measure specific parts of their body, so you have to handle them, which we don't want to do in the winter. So most of the time, if we see something that we know is is not a Townsend's. We just call it Myotis species. So we know it's either a little brown or probably a Yuma, but we don't know for sure. So we're just saying Myotis species. And those are usually by themselves. They typically, I've never seen one that's like with another one. They're almost always like just single. This is a little, I hope.
Has a cure for the white nose been discovered?
No.
So they haven't tried dusting them or fogging them with anything, or?
I don't know if it's been tried yet. I'm not super up to speed on the latest white nose research, but they are trying a lot of things. Like I mentioned, the probiotics, just see if those kinds of things could be helpful. So here's a little video of one of my coworkers taking a swab of a hibernating bat. And then you can see there's just all these little
Oh yeah, they're there.
bat.
It's interesting that they're not closer together. I mean,
I know.
full in the cave,
Yeah.
but they are sitting on the top of the cave, so that's where the warmest part of the cave is.
Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty much all I had for sort of like the more, kind of bat research and that kind of stuff. And then I was going to go into the backyard bat habitat. I don't know if you want to just go into it or if people feel like they need a break. I guess I've been talking for like 40 minutes, so. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so they're communal, the bats, but it's not like they mate for life or anything like that. Okay.
No, yeah. Yeah. All right. So basically, like this is, pretty obvious. The elements that bats need are food, which in Washington we talked about is going to be insects, water, and then shelter. So basically, I mean, you can kind of think of it as like, if you're trying to attract bats to your property, you basically want to grow plants that are going to attract insects. So moths are like a pretty common food species for a lot of the bats that we have. I wouldn't recommend, trying to grow mosquitoes so you can have bats. I would just recommend growing some pretty shrubs and flowers. That seems like a better plan. So yeah, I just have a photo here of one of the handouts that I had up front. Well, I might have forgotten to grab it, but yeah. So it basically lists some native plants that you. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So this has a native plant list. It has, this one's statewide, and then it has some that are specific for Eastern Washington. Always, I like to promote planting native species, but there's obviously going to be other species that could be more ornamental that would also attract insects, that would attract bats. Snags, we talked about snags, so dead trees can be really important for bat roosting habitat. So if you're able to, if you have some snags, or you can create snags, or just keep your snags, then that can be really good for bats as well. And then some of the other tree species that they might use for roosting would be Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, red cedar, quaking aspen, and Oregon white oak. I would say for the most part it's going to be like mature trees of those species, where they can like get in between the crevices of the bark and that sort of thing. Okay, so water. If you don't have water near you, you could create a water source for bats. Basically, bats, they drink while they're flying, so you have to have a pretty good sized water feature. for them to be able to drink from it. Like just a bird bath probably isn't gonna cut it, unfortunately. So like the huge 170 gallon water troughs have been shown to attract bats. I mean, I would say generally here in Western Washington, like there's probably gonna be water close enough to where you are that you wouldn't necessarily need to go to the trouble. This is for more arid places. If you do, you know, decide to go the water trough route, just be sure to have like an escape route, because otherwise the bats could, you know, if they get into the water, they can't get out. They can also trap birds or other small mammals that might go there to drink. Okay, so shelter, so they're, we kind of talked about the natural shelter, so trees, so they can roost in the bark, or if there's cavities, that sort of thing. Structures, so, you know, man-made structures, barns, sheds, houses, that kind of thing. Those are mostly going to be attractive to the maternity colonies. And then you can also put up bat boxes if you want to try to attract bats to your property. So there are a lot of nuances to make sure that they're going to be attractive to bats, and we'll go over that, all of that stuff. Go ahead.
So if you build bat boxes, you're not gonna pull them out of your peak or attic, you're just gonna bring more in, right? Is that the one?
That is correct, yeah. So a lot of people want, you know, they like the bats, they want the bats, they just don't want them in their house, you know, which is understandable. And so they'll say, oh, maybe I can put up this bat box, and they'll start roosting in the bat box, and they won't use my attic anymore. And that doesn't necessarily work, and usually it's just because the attic space, I mean, they do have like high site fidelity, so they want to go back to these same areas year after year. But also there's something about that place that is really good, you know, attractive for them, and generally it's probably going to be the temperature. Yeah, and it's really hard to recreate that in a bat box, you know, that's this big, just because it will heat up during the day, but at night it's going to cool off really quickly, whereas a big structure is going to hold that heat through the night. So maternity boxes are, like we talked about, they want to be in these groups, so they have to be multi-chambered, so they have to have, this is what one of them might look like, and then this is looking at it from the bottom, so you can see that this one has 5 different chambers. So they have all of these little nooks and crannies to crawl into, and having all of those chambers allows more bats to fit in there, which allows them to hold that heat more. For our area, it's recommended that the chambers should be about 3/4 of an inch deep. If they're larger, you know, it's just not going to create that tiny space that they really like to cram into. So let's see what do I have next. Then there's the non-maternity bat boxes. So these are just going to be like your single chamber, or you might have seen some that are called rocket boxes. They're just, you know, kind of look something like that picture. So those are just going to be individuals, or, you know, smaller groups of like males and non-breeding females. I mean, they could also use them after they disperse from their maternity colony in the summer. They might use those. So those are good as well. So placement of the bat boxes is really important. They have to be at least 12 feet high, but ideally more, at least 20 or so. They have to have a clear path for exit and entry. So they call that like vegetational clutter. They don't want to have a lot of things that they're having to like navigate around to try to get into this box. For our area, it needs to be painted black or dark brown. So I've noticed a lot of them that are for sale. They're kind of more like a raw wood, or they have like a light stain on them, and those just, they're not dark enough. They're gonna have to be painted, and that's so they can absorb more of that heat. They should face south or east or southeast, and west could work too. But north is not a good aspect. They need at least 10 hours of sun exposure each day from June to August, so during the breeding season. And so for the maternity boxes, if you're trying to, if you have a structure, well, I mean, even if your structure doesn't already have bats, placing the boxes on a structure is gonna help hold the heat. So, you've got it against a large structure. It's gonna help hold that heat in versus it just being on a pole by itself. Protection from predators is important. So a lot of times, people put them on trees and the bats aren't interested because something can crawl up there, but raccoons can reach their little hands up there and pull them out. And also a lot of times the trees are gonna shade the box. They're not gonna provide the 10 plus hours of sun exposure that they need. They're more likely to be occupied if they're less than a quarter mile from a water source. So this is one thing that I recommend to people is to do like a back-to-back maternity house, and it talks about that in this Bat Builder's Handbook. This is a really nice resource if you're interested in bat boxes. It talks a lot about just the different elements that are needed, height, exposure, all those different kind of things to make sure that they're occupied. And so you could have like 2 maternity boxes, that are, it could even be two chambered boxes, or 2 4-chambered boxes. And what you do is you mount them on 2 posts back to back to each other. You cut a little slit in the back of each so they can crawl out of one box and into the other. And so that space between the boxes essentially creates another chamber. And it also creates a lot of differences in heat throughout the 2 boxes, because one is going to be exposed differently than the other one. So it's like, if this side's getting too hot, they can move to this side. So that is in here, the description of how to do that. So that might be something to try. And then another thing that I really like in this resource is this has all of these different, they basically put up all these bat boxes and then researched all these different elements and quantified like what percentage was occupied. So like 20% of the boxes on trees were occupied, 52% on poles were occupied, and then 64% on wood or masonry buildings were occupied. So you're getting, the greatest likelihood of them being occupied by bats when you put them on a structure, basically. Dominant land use within 1 mile radius. So yeah, this is just, I don't know, I found this really interesting. It's nice to kind of have some science behind it instead of just like, oh yeah, we did that once and it worked.
Interesting notice.
So I'm kind of getting to my last few slides here. So I just wanted to encourage people to report groups of bats. It's, even if you don't want us coming to your house and counting them, it is just nice to know where these colonies are, but we can also come and count them and let you know how many there are. We can set up our detectors and let you know what species are there. And so it's just helping us learn a lot more about our bat populations and about white nose as well. I do have, this handout has those websites where you can go and report that. Don't handle live bats. You can, if you find a sick or dead bat, we have like a separate reporting form for that. So that's just kind of like for us to be able to monitor if there's some sort of disease outbreak or something like that. And yeah, just avoid entering areas where bats may be living, just to try to limit that spread of white nose. And if you do find a bat, don't touch it. You know, I mean, rabies in bats is fairly rare, but you know, it is a incurable disease, so it's not something that you want to get. And so if a bat bites you, then you always need to I mean, this says call the health department. I think that's a good idea, but I would also go to the emergency room too and tell them that you got bit by a bat. So yeah, just if you have to move a bat for some reason, just make sure that you use a shovel or something like that, so you're not actually touching the bat. And yeah, we have a Living with Wildlife webpage that has a lot of information about bats and about excluding them from buildings and that sort of thing. We also have a bat on our website. We have a bat conservation plan that has a ton of information about bats in general, and then specific species that we have in Washington. So there's my contact information if anybody wants to reach out, and then yeah, take any questions. Yeah.